When my neighbor Sandra reported my 17-year-old son to the police for digital terrorism, because he changed our home internet password, I figured we'd reached the peak of homeowners association madness. I was completely wrong. Imagine this scene. 4 squad cars with flashing red and blue lights illuminating every aluminum-sided home on Oak Avenue. My teenager Jake standing there in his Star Wars pajamas, clutching a gaming laptop like it was evidence of a federal crime. The aroma of stale coffee from the officers' travel mugs mingled with the cool evening air as they attempted to understand why they'd been dispatched to arrest a minor for creating a humorous network name. However, what we uncovered in Sandra's cellar 4 weeks later would result in her federal imprisonment, reveal a multi-million-dollar criminal operation, and transform our peaceful suburban hell into the most rewarding justice saga you'll experience this year. Leave a comment below. What's the most ridiculous thing your HOA has ever accused you of? Also, tell us where you're viewing from. I'm curious to see how widespread this insanity really is. Let me rewind and explain how a divorced father, his programming prodigy's son, accidentally started a war against a criminal mastermind masquerading as a suburban community association leader. I'm David Richardson, and 4 years ago, I committed the classic single-father error of thinking a tranquil neighborhood would solve everything. After my former spouse emptied our joint accounts and disappeared with her yoga instructor, I desperately needed a new beginning for myself and my 17-year-old son. Jake Willowbrook Commons appeared to be suburban utopia, modest 2-story homes, impeccably maintained lawns that smelled of fresh mulch and weekend barbecues, and an HOA monthly fee of only $180. The property agent convinced me that the association president, Svendra Mitchell, was a meticulous former loan officer who genuinely cared about our community. First warning sign: anyone who describes themselves as meticulous usually translates to "will torment you over flowerbed regulations." Jake's the type of teenager who assembles custom computers from online tutorials and earned admission to Stanford's elite programming workshop, which has stricter acceptance criteria than medical school. He also possesses that adolescent humor where naming our internet Pretty Fly for Wi-Fi represents comedy gold. During our initial year, Sandra appeared relatively normal. She'd drive past in her pristine silver BMW, wave from behind expensive sunglasses, occasionally mentioned that my lawn was becoming adventurous. Standard association small talk. My elderly neighbors, the Kowalski survivors of actual wartime occupation, would chuckle that American bureaucrats were playground bullies compared to genuine oppressors. Then 2022 arrived, and Sandra won the HOA presidency without opposition. Within 30 days, our mailbox began overflowing with violation notices like a malfunctioning arcade game dispensing losing tickets. My company truck parked in my own driveway? Commercial vehicle infraction, $400 penalty? The basketball hoop Jake had saved his allowance to purchase. Unauthorized recreational equipment, $400 penalty. The small vegetable garden my ex-wife had planted before abandoning us. Non-compliant landscaping disrupting neighborhood visual harmony for $100 penalty. I'm discussing a house I sacrificed for. Working overtime until my fingers ached from gripping electrical cables and my spine screamed from crawling through sweltering attics. The bitter taste of exhaustion and the sting of construction dust in my lungs. That's what purchasing this property cost me. But the final straw arrived via registered mail, delivered with the familiar thud of the postal worker's boots on my front steps. Sandra's letter, imprinted on official HOA stationery that probably cost more than my weekly food budget demanded. I immediately stopped broadcasting. Inappropriate digital communications that violated community standards of respect and patriotic values. She was referring to our internet name. Jake had upgraded our entire house with a mesh network system. The kid's a technical genius, and named it FBI Surveillance Van Number 4 as an innocent joke. It's the kind of thing that makes neighbors smile when they're browsing available connections. Sandra interpreted it as a declaration of war against her authority. I crumpled that letter and slam-dunked it into the kitchen garbage where it belonged. This is America, last I checked. My property, my router, my right to name my Wi-Fi whatever amuses my teenager. That's when Sandra revealed her true nature. She excavated some archaic municipal regulation about electronic intimidation. It's probably written when dial-up modems sounded like malfunctioning robots, and filed an official complaint with the county sheriff's office. She actually claimed our internet name. It constituted a terrorist communication device, causing emotional trauma to patriotic residents. Sheriff Deputy? Martinez arrived looking like he'd prefer investigating actual felonies. The unfortunate officer had to explain with complete seriousness that he'd been dispatched to investigate a cyber-terrorism allegation against a teenager's internet humor. The absurdity hung in the air like the scent of ozone before a thunderstorm. But here's what I didn't realize yet, what none of us understood. The Wi-Fi complaint wasn't about community standards or bruised ego. It was camouflage for something larger, more sinister, and worth millions of dollars. Sandra Mitchell wasn't merely a power-obsessed HOA president. She was a criminal orchestrator, and my family had just painted targets on our backs. Sandra's declaration of war materialized exactly 72 hours after Deputy Martinez departed our driveway. She scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting with 6 hours' notice, the kind of corporate ambush that would impress a hostile takeover specialist. I attended anyway, because in my family, we don't surrender to bullies. The community center reeked of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner that burned your nostrils like ammonia. Sandra sat at the head table wearing a navy business suit that screamed, "I demand to speak to your supervisor," flanked by 3 nodding sycophants who probably practiced synchronized agreement during their free time. We're addressing a clear and present danger to our community's digital security, she announced, her voice dripping with manufactured authority that would make autocrats everywhere take notes. She actually used the phrase, "clear and present danger," about my kid's Wi-Fi joke. Within 20 minutes, they'd rammed through the Digital Harmony Resolution, a legal document granting the HOA authority to monitor and control any wireless networks. In the neighborhood, offensive names resulted in $75 daily fines. Could even contact internet providers to disconnect problematic connections. Vote 4-1. Mrs. Peterson only voted against it because she thought Wi-Fi was a type of indoor plant. When I challenged the vote, citing what I remembered from our HOA bylaws about requiring 48-hour notice for meetings, Cassandra's smile could have sliced steel. The sheriff's terrorism complaint makes this a public safety emergency exempt from normal procedures. The woman had orchestrated this entire legal trap from the moment she filed that initial complaint. But here's the thing about electricians. We troubleshoot problems professionally. That evening, I dissected our HOA documents like I was hunting a faulty circuit. Turns out my grandfather's advice about reading the fine print was accurate. Emergency meetings can only bypass notice requirements for genuine emergencies, like natural disasters or imminent physical threats. Hurt feelings about internet names don't qualify under any legitimate interpretation of the law. I filed a formal challenge with the state attorney general's office before my morning coffee cooled. Jake had his own response to Sandra's power grab. He changed our Wi-Fi to Sandra drinks boxed wine alone, and grinned like he'd just invented fire. The neighborhood explosion was magnificent. Within 48 hours, new networks bloomed like digital wildflowers. HOA Karen detection network, Sandra needs therapy, and my personal favorite from the Kowalskis, survived Nazis, can handle Karen. Sandra's counterattack was swift and brutal. She hired a private investigator, some bottom feeder in a wrinkled suit whose beat-up Honda leaked oil puddles on our pristine suburban asphalt. The guy reeked of cigarettes and failure, following me to job sites like a lost puppy with abandonment. Issues. Then came the daily harassment blitzkrieg. Noise complaints about Jake's gaming setup at 2 p.m. on Saturday. Citations for unauthorized vehicle maintenance when I checked my tire pressure. A formal complaint claiming I operated an unlicensed electrical business because I'd helped my neighbor repair a broken outlet, basic human decency. But Sandra made a crucial error. She became greedy and desperate, which is when criminals always make their biggest mistakes. My security cameras, basic wireless units I'd installed after the stalking began, caught her. Red-handed at 11:23 p.m. on a Wednesday. Crystal clear footage of HOA President Sandra Mitchell crouched behind my house with a flashlight and what looked suspiciously like lock-picking tools, attempting to break into my electrical meter box. The next morning, I printed that footage in glorious 8x10 color and knocked on her door. She answered in a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Conducting routine HOA electrical safety inspections," she said without missing a beat. "Your professional background makes you high risk for code violations." 11 p.m. with lockpicks. "The community deserves thorough protection." That's when I realized this woman was either completely delusional or playing a game with rules I didn't understand yet. But I had my own cards to play. I handed her the photos and smiled. "Funny thing about being an electrician, Sandra, I know exactly what criminal trespassing and attempted breaking and entering look like. I also know that security footage with timestamps makes excellent evidence in court." Her face went white as her precious BMW. "You can't prove anything. Already sent copies to the sheriff's office and my attorney." Oh, and Jake uploaded the video to his blog. Kid's got quite the following among HOA abuse victims nationwide. These things have a funny way of going viral when they show HOA presidents committing actual crimes. For the first time since this nightmare started, Sandra Mitchell looked genuinely afraid. Not angry, not indignant, afraid. Her perfectly manicured hands actually trembled as she closed the door without another word. But here's what really bothered me about that security footage. She wasn't randomly trying to break into my meter. She knew exactly where to look, like she had blueprints or had been there before. She was searching for something specific near our foundation, something she expected to find. How does an HOA president know the exact layout of your property's electrical system? And what was she really looking for in the dark? Sandra's retaliation came like a Category 5 hurricane hitting a trailer park, swift, devastating, and surgically designed to destroy everything I'd spent years building. Within 48 hours of our doorstep confrontation, she'd filed a complaint with the State Electrical Licensing Board, claiming I was performing unlicensed electrical work on residential properties. The bitter irony could choke you. She was accusing a licensed union electrician of being unlicensed. But bureaucrats investigate first and ask questions later. So suddenly, I had state inspectors crawling through my job sites like ants at a picnic. Then Sandra got creative with economic warfare. She started calling every business where my company had contracts, spinning elaborate stories about safety concerns and ongoing criminal investigations. The acrid smell of burnt coffee and desperation hung in the air during my emergency meeting. With Henderson Construction, where I'd worked steady contracts for 3 years, "David, you're solid people, but this woman's called my office 6 times this week," Mr. Henderson said, loosening his tie like it was strangling him. "Claims, you're under investigation for fraud, safety violations, insurance fraud, the whole 9 yards. My liability carrier's threatening to drop me if I keep using contractors with pending legal issues." That's when the scope of Sandra's operation hit me like a live wire. This wasn't random harassment. She understood exactly which pressure points would cause maximum financial damage. Someone with this level of business savvy had definitely done this before. Jake, meanwhile, had transformed our house into a digital evidence fortress. Watching my 17-year-old work was like seeing a master pianist perform. Every keystroke deliberate, every backup system elegant. He'd created what he called a documentation ecosystem that automatically captured screenshots, recordings, and timestamps of every Sandra interaction, all stored on cloud servers she couldn't access or destroy. But her nuclear option came through Lincoln High School. Sandra called the principal, claiming Jake was cyberbullying community members through his Wi-Fi names and blog posts about HOA abuse. Mrs. Davidson summoned me for an emergency conference with that carefully neutral administrator tone that usually means your kid's in serious trouble. I left a job site mid-installation, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went bone white. The principal's office fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps. Mrs. Davidson wore that expression of someone who'd already reached a verdict before hearing evidence. But here's where Sandra's plan backfired spectacularly. After I explained the situation and showed Mrs. Davidson Jake's blog documenting legitimate community issues, her entire demeanor shifted. "Mr. Richardson, I live in Meadowbrook Estates. Different HOA, same problems. Your son isn't cyberbullying anyone?" He's documenting abuse and exercising constitutional rights. If anything, he's performing a public service. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Between us, I'd love to see someone take down these petty dictators. That's when I decided to bring in professional reinforcements. I called Maria Rodriguez, Channel 9's investigative reporter, who specialized in consumer protection stories. Maria had built a career destroying corporate bullies and corrupt officials. Exactly what we needed. Maria arrived at our house the next evening in a news van that made Sandra's surveillance look like amateur hour. She was sharp as a surgical scalpel with the kind of predatory smile that probably made corrupt politicians check their life insurance policies. David, I've been covering HOA abuse for 12 years. The Sandra character sounds eerily familiar, like Deja Vu familiar. Mind if I dig into her background? 1 week later, Maria spread her research across my kitchen table like she was planning a military invasion. The pattern she'd uncovered made my electrician's blood run cold. Sandra's been HOA president in 2 previous neighborhoods over the past decade. Same playbook every time. Systematically target vulnerable residents with harassment campaigns until they're forced to sell below market value. Single parents, elderly folks, minorities, anyone who can't fight back effectively. Here's the kicker that turned this from harassment into criminal conspiracy. In both previous neighborhoods, Sandra had somehow ended up buying the distressed properties through shell companies, then flipping them for massive profits or holding them for development deals, already acquired for foreclosed homes. In your neighborhood using the same tactics? Maria continued, pointing to property records that told the whole ugly story. This isn't community management, David. This is systematic real estate fraud disguised as HOA enforcement. That night, lying awake listening to the whisper of wind through our bedroom windows, everything clicked into place. We weren't annoying neighbors to Sandra. We were her next acquisition targets. Harassment, the property knowledge, the determination. To drive us out, it was all part of a calculated business plan. But understanding her criminal enterprise meant we could finally fight back strategically. If Sandra wanted to play real estate predator, she was about to discover that this union electrician knew how to cause some serious short circuits in her operation. The question keeping me awake: how many other families had she destroyed? And who else was helping her run this scheme? Sandra's desperation reached psychotic levels when she decided to destroy the most precious thing in my life, my relationship with my son. The Child Protective Services complaint she filed was so vicious, so calculated to cause maximum emotional damage, that I knew we were dealing with someone who'd completely lost touch with human decency. Mr. Richardson, we've received serious allegations of child endangerment, the CPS caseworker announced, standing on my doorstep with that official clipboard that strikes fear into every parent's heart. Claims include exposing your minor son to dangerous hacking activities, providing unrestricted internet access for criminal purposes, and failing to supervise potentially illegal cyberterrorism. The morning air carried the scent of freshly cut grass, mixed with the caseworker's drugstore perfume, creating this surreal normalcy while my world threatened to collapse. She spent 2 hours inspecting our home. Jake's organized room with programming textbooks and perfectly maintained computer equipment. Our clean kitchen, the family photos, showing a normal father-son relationship. Sir, with respect, this complaint appears to be completely fabricated, the caseworker finally said, shaking her head in disgust. Your son is clearly brilliant, well cared for, and engaged in legitimate educational activities. Filing false CPS reports is a felony, and whoever made this complaint should be prosecuted. But Sandra wasn't finished trying to destroy my life. Through her banking connections from her previous career, she manipulated my business loan into early termination. Call came at 6 a.m., jolting me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. Mr. Richardson, First National Bank is exercising our right to call your business loan due to material changes in your risk profile. You have 72 hours to pay the full balance of $52,000. Sat in that sterile bank conference room later that morning, breathing in the smell of industrial carpet cleaner and watching some 20-something loan officer shuffle papers like he was handling radioactive material. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while he explained that community complaints and pending investigations made me a liability. That night, I came closer to giving up than I'd ever been. The weight of this battle felt heavier than the 400 MP. electrical panels I'd installed in summer heat that could melt asphalt. Maybe Sandra was right. Maybe I should just disappear and let her win. But Jake had other plans. Dad, you know what happens when bullies win? They find new victims. We're not just fighting for us anymore. We're fighting for everyone she's going to target next. That's when the miracle happened. Jake's blog documenting our fight had exploded across social media, drawing attention from HOA abuse advocacy groups nationwide. The comments section became a support network of families sharing their own nightmare stories. More importantly, a legal defense fund that started at zero hit $28,000. Within 48 hours of going viral, the National Association of Home Builders contacted me directly. Sandra's systematic fraud was damaging legitimate construction businesses across multiple states, and they offered to fund our legal battle as part of a broader investigation into HOA corruption schemes. But Sandra's response to losing control was where she made her fatal mistake. Desperate to silence Jake's blog, she attempted to hack into his servers from her home computer at 3:23 a.m. on a Wednesday. Big mistake. Attacking a teenage coding prodigy on his own digital turf was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Jake didn't just block her cyber attack, he counter-hacked her entire home network in real time, documenting every attempt she made to delete evidence, plant viruses, and access his personal accounts. The kid turned her own computer into a confessional booth, recording her increasingly panicked phone calls as she realized she'd been caught red-handed committing federal cybercrimes. Dad, you need to hear this, Jake said, playing back audio he'd captured from her security breach attempt. Sandra was on the phone with someone speaking in broken Russian about liquidating assets and evacuation, protocols, and something about the basement operation being compromised. Russian money laundering? Basement operations? Suddenly, everything clicked into place, like the final piece of a deadly puzzle. Maria Rodriguez arrived at our house within an hour, carrying a briefcase full of FBI surveillance photos that made my electrician's blood run cold. The images showed Sandra meeting with known organized crime figures at various locations around the city. David, your son didn't just annoy a power-hungry HOA president, Spready explained, spreading the evidence across our kitchen table. He accidentally exposed an international money laundering operation using neighborhood infrastructure to wash millions in criminal proceeds. The real estate fraud was just cover for something much bigger. That explained her obsession with our basement, her detailed knowledge of the electrical systems, her desperate attempts to access areas near our foundation. She wasn't trying to steal our house. She was protecting a criminal enterprise that depended on underground access routes we didn't even know existed. The question that kept me staring at the ceiling that night, if we'd stumbled into an international conspiracy, how many other neighbors were involved? And what would they do to protect their operation? The full scope of Sandra's criminal empire revealed itself through the most mundane discovery imaginable, a city permit application that Jake found while cross-referencing property records at 2 a.m. Dad, wake up. You need to see this, he whispered, shaking me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. His laptop screen glowed in our dark bedroom, displaying a 1988 city permit for basement. Structural modifications at Sandra's address. The permit description was innocuous enough: foundation reinforcement and utility access improvements. But when Jake overlaid it with historical city planning maps, the truth hit us like a sledgehammer to the chest. Our entire neighborhood sat on top of a network of Prohibition-era tunnels, originally built in the 1920s to transport illegal alcohol. From hidden speakeasies to the old railway depot, the tunnels had been sealed and forgotten for decades. But Sandra's structural modifications had reopened them, creating a hidden highway system running directly under our houses. Look at this, Dad, Jake said, his fingers flying across the keyboard, as he pulled up thermal imaging data from the city's infrastructure database. There's a tunnel running from her basement under the Kowalski's house directly to the foundation of our property. That's why she knew exactly where our electrical meter was. She's been accessing our basement through the tunnel system. The basement she'd been so desperate to search wasn't random. It was a critical juncture point in her underground network. And our house was blocking her access to the main artery leading to the old railway station, which was now the downtown financial district. But the tunnels weren't just for real estate fraud. Mining operations that were draining massive amounts of electricity from residential neighborhoods across 3 states. The power theft was so sophisticated that it appeared to be distributed across hundreds of homes, making it nearly impossible to detect. Until now, Sandra had been using the tunnel network to tap directly into neighborhood electrical grids, running massive server farms in the hidden underground spaces while residents' power bills skyrocketed, and no one could figure out why. "David, this is bigger than we thought," Maria said over the phone, her voice tight with excitement and fear. FBI's cryptocurrency task force has been hunting this operation for 2 years. They've traced over $60 million in transactions to servers hidden in residential neighborhoods, but they could never find the physical location. The scope was staggering. Sandra wasn't just stealing electricity. She was hosting illegal servers for dark web marketplaces, money laundering operations, and cryptocurrency mining farms that generated millions in untraceable digital currency. The HOA violations and property acquisitions were cover operations, designed to control access points and eliminate witnesses. Every family she'd driven out of the neighborhood had been living directly above. It's critical infrastructure for her criminal network. The harassment campaigns weren't random targeting. They were strategic removals of security threats. "She's been planning this for years," Jake said, pulling up property purchase records that showed a clear pattern. Every house she bought through. Foreclosure sits on a tunnel junction. She needed to control the access points to protect the operation. That's when the final piece fell into place. The Russian phone calls, the international money laundering connections, the desperate attempts to access our basement. Sandra wasn't the mastermind. She was middle management in a much larger criminal organization, and our house sat on top of their most valuable asset, the cryptocurrency servers hidden in our neighborhood's underground. Tunnels were generating millions in untraceable income for organized crime syndicates. Our Wi-Fi joke hadn't just annoyed a petty HOA president. It had threatened to expose an international criminal conspiracy, worth more money than most small countries' GDP. But now that we knew the truth, the real question became, how do you fight? An enemy with unlimited resources, international connections, and absolutely nothing left to lose? The war room we assembled in my kitchen looked like something out of a spy thriller. FBI surveillance photos, tunnel blueprints, cryptocurrency transaction records, and enough legal documents to choke a horse. The smell of strong coffee mixed with the metallic scent of fear as we planned our counterattack. Against an international criminal organization, Maria Rodriguez had brought in the heavy artillery, federal prosecutors from the Organized Crime Task Force, state attorney general investigators focusing on HOA fraud, civil rights attorneys targeting discriminatory harassment, and environmental lawyers concerned about fire hazards from illegal electrical modifications. It was like assembling the Justice League if superheroes wore cheap suits and carried briefcases full of subpoenas. "Here's what we're dealing with," said Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI's Cryptocurrency Crimes Unit, spreading thermal imaging photos. Across my kitchen table, conservative estimate puts this operation at generating $18 to $25 million annually in untraceable cryptocurrency. The tunnel system extends under 52 properties across 3 residential developments. Jake had become our secret weapon in ways I never imagined. The kid had created a comprehensive digital forensics package that made federal investigators look like amateurs. Every HOA violation, every harassment incident, every suspicious property transaction, all cross-referenced with electrical usage. Spikes, cryptocurrency, blockchain analysis, and tunnel access points. The beauty of their system was its distributed nature. Jake explained to the assembled team, sounding more like a federal prosecutor than a 17-year-old. By spreading the power theft across dozens of homes, individual increases looked normal. But when you map the usage patterns against tunnel locations, the theft becomes obvious. The legal team had their own arsenal of weapons. Federal RICO laws applied because the criminal enterprise affected interstate commerce through cryptocurrency transactions. Every dollar Sandra had stolen from HOA funds constituted embezzlement under state fiduciary laws. The utility theft exceeded federal wire fraud thresholds, most satisfying of all. Her false CPS reports carried mandatory minimum sentences in our state. But Agent Chen delivered the strategy that would bring down the entire operation. We're going to let them think they've won while we document everything. Mr. Richardson, we need you to appear defeated. Maybe even consider moving away. Meanwhile, we'll be recording every criminal act they commit, trying to secure their operation. The sting operation would be elegant in its simplicity. I'd wear a wire during any negotiation meetings Sandra requested. Jake's security cameras would capture evidence of continued trespassing and intimidation. Most importantly, federal agents would monitor the tunnel system to document the full scope of the criminal enterprise. Meanwhile, the community mobilization was beautiful to watch. The Willowbrook Residents Coalition had grown to 68 families, each with their own evidence of Sandra's systematic harassment. Mrs. Peterson, who'd voted against the Wi-Fi resolution because she thought it was about houseplants, turned out to have been documenting every suspicious HOA expenditure for 3 years. I knew something was wrong when they charged us $2,500 to trim bushes that cost maybe $400, she said, pulling out meticulously organized receipts and bank statements. But I'm 79 years old. Who was going to believe me? The recall petition, too. Remove the entire corrupted HOA board had collected over 250 signatures. More importantly, class action lawsuit for fund misappropriation would freeze all HOA assets until the investigation concluded. Jake's technical mastery reached new levels as he prepared our digital defense systems. He'd created untraceable backups of all evidence on distributed servers across multiple countries. Any attempt to destroy our documentation would be futile. Information existed in too many places to eliminate. But his masterpiece was the neighborhood, a network he'd developed. Every participating household now had free, secure internet that automatically documented and reported any suspicious electrical usage, network intrusions, or physical surveillance attempts. It was like turning the entire community into a digital fortress. The emotional preparation was equally important. Months of harassment had taken their toll on both of us. The therapist recommended by the victim advocacy group helped us process the trauma while maintaining focus on justice. These sessions taught me that what we'd endured wasn't just personal harassment. It was systematic psychological warfare designed to break our spirits. Resource gathering had exceeded our wildest expectations. The Legal Defense Fund had reached $85,000 from donors nationwide. Pro bono technical support came from major cybersecurity firms who wanted to study Sandra's operation for research purposes. My electrical union provided expert witnesses for the utility theft prosecution. Real estate attorneys volunteered to handle property rights violations. But the most powerful weapon in our arsenal was something Sandra had never expected: community solidarity. Every family she'd targeted, every neighbor she'd intimidated, every resident who'd suffered under her regime was now united in bringing her down. The plan was set. The evidence was documented. The legal team was assembled. The federal agents were positioned. Now came the hard part: convincing a desperate criminal organization that we were defeated while secretly recording every crime they committed, trying to finish us off. Game time? Sandra's desperation reached full-blown panic mode when she discovered the federal investigation through what we later learned was a corrupt city planning official on her payroll. Her response was swift, vicious, and exactly the kind of criminal behavior we needed her to commit on camera. The frame-up attempt was so clumsy it would have been funny if it wasn't trying to destroy my life. At 3:52 a.m. on a Tuesday, someone broke into my work truck parked in our driveway and planted evidence that would make a DEA agent salivate hard. Drives containing what appeared to be cryptocurrency mining software, detailed electrical schematics of the neighborhood's power grid, and financial records showing suspicious transactions. The anonymous tip to police came 6 hours later. Concerned citizen reported suspicious activity at the Richardson residence, suggesting they check my vehicle for evidence of the neighborhood's electrical theft problems. When Detective Williams arrived with a search warrant, the morning air still carried the metallic scent of dew on my truck's hood and the lingering smell of whoever had been smoking cheap cigarettes during their evidence-planting mission. I handed over my keys with a smile that probably looked suspicious but was actually relief. We'd been expecting this move. "Mr. Richardson, we found some concerning materials in your vehicle." Detective Williams said, holding up evidence bags containing the planted hard drives. "We're going to need you to come downtown for questioning." That's when Sandra made her fatal mistake. She showed up at the arrest scene not as a concerned neighbor, watching police activity. She arrived before the detective had even finished. Reading my rights, positioned herself perfectly to see the evidence being removed from my truck, and had her phone out recording everything like she was documenting her victory. "I knew he was behind the electrical theft," she announced loudly enough for our security cameras to capture every word. Those computer drives probably contain all the evidence of his criminal enterprise. The problem? He hadn't told anyone about the planted drives yet. The only way Sandra could know what evidence would be found was if she'd put it there herself. Agent Chen later told me that watching Sandra incriminate herself on federal surveillance footage was like watching a masterclass in how not to commit crimes. Within 4 hours, FBI cyber forensics had traced the planted hard drives back to Sandra's own computer network, proving the evidence came from her personal devices. But Sandra wasn't finished digging her own grave. When the planted evidence scheme collapsed, she escalated to direct threats against federal agents. Agent Chen received an anonymous call warning her to stop harassing innocent community leaders and suggesting that accidents happen to investigators who don't know when. To quit, the call came from Sandra's home phone. She'd apparently forgotten that federal agents have caller ID. Meanwhile, the neighborhood descended into siege warfare. Sandra hired private security guards, sketchy guys in unmarked cars who positioned themselves at every entrance to our development. They carried cameras, followed residents to work, and made it clear that anyone cooperating with outside agitators would face consequences. The intimidation tactics backfired spectacularly. Instead of scaring people into silence, Sandra's private army galvanized community resistance. The Kowalskis, who'd survived actual Nazi occupation, were particularly unimpressed by suburban fascism. "These American bullies are kindergarten children compared to real tyranny," Mrs. Kowalski announced at an emergency residence meeting. We did not escape Poland to be terrorized by HOA criminals in our own neighborhood. That's when we discovered the extent of Sandra's underground network. Literally, Jake's motion sensors throughout the tunnel system detected unprecedented activity. Multiple people were moving through the hidden passages at all hours, carrying equipment and apparently preparing for some kind of major operation. "Dad, they're not just mining cryptocurrency down there anymore," Jake said, analyzing thermal imaging data that made my blood run cold. "The heat signatures suggest they're setting up something much bigger, industrial-level equipment that's generating serious electrical loads." Agent Chen's response was immediate and terrifying. "We need to evacuate the neighborhood. If they're setting up large-scale server farms or manufacturing operations in unstable tunnels under residential properties, we're looking at potential catastrophic infrastructure collapse." But evacuation would give Sandra exactly what she wanted: empty houses and no witnesses to whatever final operation she was planning. The federal task force faced an impossible choice: protect residents by evacuating, or catch criminals by using us as bait. That's when Sandra made her most desperate move yet. Unable to frame me, intimidate federal agents, or scare the community into submission, she decided to eliminate the problem at its source. The arson attempt on our house was captured by 6 different security cameras from multiple angles, showing Sandra personally attempting to start an electrical fire that would have killed me and Jake in our sleep. Only Jake's smart home fire suppression system and the quick response of our volunteer firefighter neighbor prevented murder by arson. But now we had federal attempted murder charges to add to Sandra's growing list of felonies. The gloves were off. Sandra had crossed the line from white-collar crime to violent felonies, and federal law enforcement was done playing games. Sandra's final act of desperation transformed our quiet suburban street into something resembling a war zone. When the arson attempt failed and federal murder charges became inevitable, she barricaded herself inside her mansion with enough weapons to outfit a small militia and enough paranoia to fuel a conspiracy theory convention. The SWAT team evacuation began at dawn, with armored vehicles rumbling down Oak Avenue like mechanical thunder. The acrid smell of diesel exhausts mixed with the morning dew as tactical officers went door to door, moving families to safety while Sandra screamed threats through her security system's loudspeakers. This is federal government tyranny, her voice echoed across our lawns, distorted by cheap speakers into something resembling a deranged robot. David Richardson is a deep state operative sent to destroy patriotic Americans who believe in property rights. The irony was rich enough to choke on. A woman who'd spent months filing false government complaints was now claiming government persecution, but not everyone evacuated willingly. The Kowalskis flatly refused to leave their home, despite tactical officers explaining the danger. "We survived Nazi bombardment in Warsaw," Mr. Kowalski announced from his front porch, wearing his best suit, like he was attending church. "We will not be intimidated by suburban fascists with temper tantrums."